Hello, good morning. I'm starting to peel some tape off to tape down some pieces of paper. This lesson you can do in a sketchbook or just on some pieces. My pieces that I'm going to use today are about 4x4 or 4x5, so I can fit them in frame a little easier. I like to tape mine down so that I can hold it at an angle that's comfy for me. How is everyone's morning going? Or afternoon, wherever you are. So for this one, we can use whatever colors we really want. I will probably be leaning more into purples, blues, and maybe some yellows. But this is a super adaptable lesson, so feel free to change the colors or go with kind of whatever you're feeling. I just typically think that the purple, blue, and yellow just make some pretty colors, maybe some pinks too. Gosh, this tape is so much louder than my other tape. Well, if I peel it this way, it's not as loud. There we go. Oh, no, loud again. So today we're going to be talking about crystals and how to kind of draw them and how to paint them. You've got a set of crystals or minerals. Nice. Yeah, I've got some off camera that I'll be sharing in a minute. Go ahead and do any kind of prep you need to do. We're almost ready to start. And as usual, I'll be working on a few different pieces because I like to work on a couple things at a time so that I can let things dry naturally, as well as just show you guys a bunch of stuff, because then if I mess up on one, I can show you how I fix it and then how to redeem myself. Oh, got it. That's cool. So for the, I will be uploading this video to YouTube afterwards in case you have to drop or you can't make it. And it doesn't usually show the chat, so I will just repeat some of these questions so that in the video you can see. So this user actually has a set of paint from Daniel Smith that's made of minerals, so it's kind of a nice little perfect thing to use for this. Yes, absolutely. All right, I think we're at time. So for those of you who are new, my name is Lacey. I am the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts, and every Saturday we have a live watercolor class at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. So you can either watch or follow along, whatever you want to do. Totally happy to just kind of hang out and paint today. I do love it if you send me pictures after the class, and you can make a video on TikTok. I love that too, but it seems like it's easier for people to send me a message on Instagram, Lacey Walker Art or Rebel Unicorn Crafts. I'm going to set my samples aside and tape down a few more. See, I'm going to be working on, I've cut 4 different pieces of paper here. You can do whichever sizes you want to do. I just find if you work a little bit smaller, not too small, but if you work a little smaller, it's easier to actually learn some of the lessons. So I'm taping these down here. actually talk a little bit about crystals before we get started. I've got my illustrated rock book over here. I've always been super fascinated by rocks. As a kid, I had a little red wagon, and I would drag it around, and then I would collect rocks that I found that were interesting, and then I would spend time trying to identify the rocks, and I don't know. Yeah. I grew up on a farm, and one of my favorite things to do was, with the proper safety gear, was I would take a big sledgehammer and I would just smash open rocks I found in the yard to see what they look like inside. How I didn't become a geologist, I don't know. All right. One other setup thing before we actually dive into more crystals. Hello, hello! So I've got a few different pieces here. Mine are 4x4 and 4x5. You can feel free to do this in a sketchbook, but I've got two different ones here. I'm going to be using a dried pan set here. I'm going to also be using a size, well, these both say size 10 on them, but this one I think is more like a size 12, so I'll be using those two. I've got a rag here. I've got a fresh water source to spray into things, and I have my 2 cups of water. And as a reminder, it's best practice, you don't have to do any of this, but it's best practice to put all of your wet supplies on your dominant side of whichever hand you're going to be using. All right, so first things first. Let's see if I can get this. Hello, Nashville. Happy to have you here. This is my illustrated guide of rocks and minerals. I find it funny they call it illustrated because it's mainly pictures, although there is this really cool illustration in here that we're going to go over. So there are all sorts of possible crystal forms that you can actually do and that form naturally. Crystals in general refer to the structure of the mineral. It doesn't always have to necessarily be a mineral, because things like snowflakes technically have a crystalline structure to them. What it means is when the atoms form, that they repeat in a very predictable and repeating pattern that then ends up creating these kind of unique repeating shapes. So we've got different cubes, so this is things like table salt. Also, I just learned this morning in doing a little extra Googling, graphite, so the stuff in your pencils, is a crystal, and I didn't know that. Anyways, but yeah, you can have cubes, you can have prisms, you can have domes, you can have hexagons and octagons. There are all sorts of things you can do in the crystalline structure. There are other interesting crystals, like the dendritic ones, where the crystalline structure kind of comes up and forms these interesting shapes in them. Makes little fern-like branches. Does anybody have a favorite type of crystal? So this is, I'm going to be basing a lot of mine on the actual crystals I have just in my studio. As I've said before, I really love rocks, and I have some that I've collected, that I've found, and then I also have some from, I usually go to the gem show most years, and this is actually a lamp, so you can actually put a light in here, and it's so cool. But this is an amethyst, and I'm trying to figure out how to set this down without making a whole bunch of noise. And then I have some just quartz crystals here to have some different structures of things. Off camera too. This one's kind of a dirtier one. This one might be more of a smoky quartz type thing. And some more Amazon amethyst. Geodes that have rounded structures. Ooh, I really want to go find geodes. I found one geode in the wild, and I'm not entirely convinced that, because I was a kid, that it wasn't hidden there for me. but I really want to go. There's an excursion you can go do in Utah to actually dig for geodes, and so that's something I really want to do. All right, let's actually start by drawing a crystal. Normally I don't have a drawing component to my classes, but this one's going to be a little bit different. So hello. First thing we want to do is pick a general crystal shape. And the first thing I do is I try to identify one of these flat edges. This is probably not a great one to show you because it's clear and it's going to be harder to see. So let's put this in frame. Labradorite. Ooh, I love labradorite. So let's actually pick this face here. So when I'm drawing a crystal, sometimes I will try to do this exactly, but sometimes I will just do this based kind of generally on one or two shapes. If you're a terrible drawer, if you can draw triangles and relatively straight lines, you're going to be totally fine. So what we're going to do here is observe this shape that's kind of glistening here. So it actually is a triangle with kind of a flat edge here and here. So let's just try to make that shape. So start with a little line here, go down, and this one extends a little bit further than this one. And then let's just connect those. So we already have one portion of our crystal. Now you want to draw these really lightly. I will actually be putting more pressure on this, especially for this first one. Let's go through and do that better there. So that you can see what I'm doing, but you should draw yours a lot lighter. Okay, so that's one facet of that crystal. Let's see if I can get another one to shine. Okay, so then the next part here, just to get an idea of where it is it's going to come here and down, and then it actually curves downward there. But if we took a look at it from the same angle, it's going to come here, flat, down, and then over. So we're getting a little bit of a change in the direction that this is facing. This would have a line that would go straight down the crystal, and this would also have a line that's parallel to that. Again, there would be another parallel line here. Basically, at any of the connection points, there are going to be lines. And then we need to kind of figure out what's just starting to be out of visual range, which is this one here. And so we want to just kind of hint to that by putting one here and then maybe bringing that so that it connects there. We just want to give a little triangle there. And we'll do the same thing over here. So a little line and then connect. And then let's make that have a little tip, a little diamond at the tip of that. So we have our first crystal here. That we can leave as that. If we wanted to, and maybe I will do this now, is I'm going to make this into more of a crystalline structure here. I'm going to grab my eraser, and I'm going to erase some of these front lines here so that I can draw one that's overlapping, which would be this one here. And for this one, there's a little chunk taken out here. I'm probably going to just imagine that this piece is more of a straight triangle, just so that we have a little bit easier time at this. So this one is going to overlap in general right here in this kind of direction. So I'm going to draw another triangle. Let's just draw just a triangle there. And then this one, it comes out here into another little triangle, and then there is another triangle here. It's all about triangles, so we're going to do one more triangle here, and let's put that there. So this is one triangle here, this is the front main one, there's a little one here, and then there's one back here. And then again, these are all going to have parallel lines from those connection points that are going to come together. And then maybe we have one that's just straight head on. So let's actually make this our center point. Draw here, here. We're going to just make this into a fairly normal crystal here. That one's head on there. All right, so we started almost a little more complicated. Let's actually use this drawing as, let's do another one that's a little bit more simple. This is actually based on one of these over here, but I'm not sure you'll be able to see it because it's clear. So we'll use the actual painting as our reference. So we could draw this just as a straight prism here and leave this out if we wanted to, but oftentimes these have some fractures that have some extra interesting pieces, and I find adding these actually helps. Add a little bit of interest. So we're going to start, instead of triangles, we're going to start, let me see how I can get all of this in frame. Here we go. We're going to start by drawing a triangle here. But we're going to cut off the bottom two edges. There we go. So this is kind of a diamond type shape. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. And in general, in order to create that kind of roundness to the top, so this line is going to be here, this next one is going to be over here, and then there will be a really slight one over here. All right, so this is this triangle here, but it's fractured off on the edges, creating a little diamond shape there. And then we always like to, well, I always like to hint to, there's another facet to this that's just out of sight. And then we can do our lines straight down from all of those points. And there we go, we've got a crystal. If we want to make this obvious at the bottom that it's also part of the crystalline structure, the front two ones are going to stick out a little bit further down. That's going to have a similar line to this, the base of this one. You want to kind of do these two as parallel lines, and then you want to do these two as parallel lines. And same over here. And there, we've got a simple crystal there. I probably should have started with that one. Sorry about that. All right, let's start there. Now, you'll notice that these two different paintings have different kind of looks to them, and that's because we can either hint to the lines that create these distinctions by leaving a little white space, which is the more difficult one, but it does look really pretty, or we can actually do some outlining at the end. So I would kind of plan on your first one maybe doing some outlining. If you're really confident and you know that you can maintain these white spaces and you drew really lightly, then you can go ahead and try this. I will be trying to do a combination of the two so that you can see both. All right, I have my drawing set. First thing I'm going to do on this one here is I'm going to try to lift some of this off. I've got my kneaded eraser, and I'm just going to kind of tap on this. This one I drew so hard, I don't think I'll be able to get very much out of it, so I'll plan on outlining this one for sure. But I'm just trying to, lift some of that pigment so that it won't be as noticeable, and I can try to preserve some of that white space, and the white space won't be taken up just by that graphite. So you can still just see it there. All right, let's actually get to painting. Before we start painting, we need to decide how the light is hitting this crystal. So, again, I know this is going to be a little bit hard to see, but I can get some reflections going, probably. There we go. So if I decide that the light is hitting right here, that means it's coming from this direction. So this is going to be the most in sun, followed by this, and then these ones will be slightly darker on the other sides. Any one that is more obscured and not catching the sun as much is going to be even darker. So let's choose. I'm going to choose this as the primary light receiver in this painting. So I'll do kind of I'll make a little mark here so we remember that the light is coming down at an angle, which means it's going to mainly hit here. This will also be pretty well in the light. And then these are going to be darker and then even darker over here. Let's start with our lights. So I want to do, I'm going to do a yellow for the light part of it, and I'm going to do it really lightly, and that will help it look like it's catching the light. So I'm going to put some fresh water here. I'm also going to go ahead and spray my pans because I haven't done that yet, just to refresh them. And then I'm going to take my smaller size 10 brush. I'm going to wet it and make sure that I don't have any pigment in there. Move that there. And then I'm going to grab, I'm feeling like a little bit of yellow ochre. Just a little bit. With then maybe some yellow, permanent yellow deep or a slightly darker. And ooh, I got a little bit more than I bargained for there. That's all right. And I'm going to test these before I actually put these down. That's a little bit too bright for what I wanted. So let's add a little more water there to dilute that color. And I think I want it a little bit warmer. So I'm going to take a little more of that yellow ochre. And I might even add in just a teeny tiny touch of the magenta, that quinacridone magenta I have. So I put my brush in there. I'm going to actually wipe it off there first before grabbing a little bit more so I can more tightly control that, just to warm up this light. There we go. That's the color I want for my first part. So again, I'm going to focus on this one here and this one here. And I'm going to attempt to maintain the white space between these areas. It's going to be a little difficult, but we're going to try to do it. So I'm going to start by putting this yellow kind of along some of these edges here. And I want this to really be what's in the light. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually wash my brush off and just have it be pretty damp. And then I'm going to grab that color I put down along those edges. And I am just putting water and a damp brush and spreading it out because I want this to be kind of concentrated at the bottom where there would be the most pigment kind of reflecting. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this, but I'm going to concentrate that color down here and here. So making a mark here. I have a bunch of divots in my paper from that amethyst sitting on these. We'll see if this turns out okay. And again, I washed my brush off, and it's damp, and I'm going to continue to repeat to kind of wash my brush off and move that out so that it is a lighter color. Also, this bottom part is going to naturally be a little bit darker than this one because the light source I've chosen is coming at this angle, which is going to hit this better than this. Or in my mind, maybe I drew my arrow a little bit weird. Going to let these sit, and I'm actually going to work on this darker one over here. I want to do something really in kind of the shadow, so let's actually go for some blues. Let's mix up a blue. I need need to have my little tester strip handy. Again, I'm going to put a little fresh water here. I'm going to grab some of this darker kind of phthalo type blue. Let's see what that looks like next to that yellow. That is nice, but I think I want to make it a teeny bit purpley, and I'll do that again with that quinacridone magenta. Just a teeny bit. I like that better. And one of the keys to doing these crystals is because they kind of reflect light from within them in different ways, is we don't want these to be super flat. We want some angles of this to reflect more or less color, so I'm going to do a similar thing that I did on the other ones, where I kind of define the areas that are going to be heavier in shadow before kind of washing my brush off lightly, tapping it off, and then these are really small here. So I just need to kind of take that stroke down, and it's going to concentrate more of that down at the bottom. It's going to give us a little more dimension. And let's go ahead and just hint to that up here on this one too. We'll be working on layers on this one. And if we're careful and we don't actually have these all touch, then it won't be much of a problem. All right, so, but I do like to work back and forth on different sides so that at least at first they're not touching. Now the center one, I do think I want it to be more of that purpley type color. So let's go ahead and put some, let's make some magenta purple. I'm gonna put some fresh water there. I might actually just take some of this purple and then grab some magenta, or sorry, that blue. Grab some magenta. We've got that nice kind of lavender purple. Hello, hello. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm concentrating this color. Now this is where the real test is going to be. I'm trying not to touch the previous colors. And so if you've been working on preserving white space, this is a great exercise for this. But I'm going to concentrate this slightly darker color there. Wash my brush off and tap it. And start to move that up. Again, I'm making those lines so that they don't touch, at least initially. The lighter we can preserve that, the more it's going to actually give a little bit of that edge shine, which is one of the beautiful qualities of those crystals. It's lighter at the top and a little darker at the bottom. I'm going to suck up a little bit of that extra water. And then I'm going to do the same thing to this quadrant here because this one connects to that. And I'm going to concentrate that color near the bottom before washing my brush off and pulling it up a little bit. Trying to preserve the white space between different segments of this. Okay, so you can already kind of see that this side is going to be lighter, less light, and darker just based on kind of the values. We're going to need to build up especially this segment and this segment to really get that high contrast. But you can start to see the effect beginning to form. All right, and now I'm actually going to do some layer building because I want these to have some dimensionality to them. I don't always want there just to be one color included in these, so I'm going to actually, I want to keep that yellow as it is, But I want to add a little bit of that quinacridone magenta kind of peeking in on the very sides of this to hint to being some dimension in there. So the first thing I'm going to do is right on those yellow segments, I'm taking a clean brush with clean water, and I'm just going to put water over all of where I put yellow. I'm going to suck that up a little bit so that we just want this to be just damp. Just a little bit damp, and you can always tell that if you get a light source and you can kind of reflect. You want to be able to see the texture of the paper through that reflection. All right, I'm going to grab a little of that magenta and I'm going to put it here so it's a little easier to access and I can kind of thin it out. And while this is damp, I'm just going to touch this kind of along the edges here, just to kind of give it a little distinction. If it's a little bit too harsh, I can wash my brush. And then I can take some of that, the dampness of the brush, and let that spread out a little bit more. But see, I think that always makes that pop out and defines those shapes a little better. So let's do the same thing on the bottom. And the reason why we're pre-wetting this is just to get kind of a nice flowy blending. You could add this wet on dry and it would be a little bit harsher. You might like the look of that, but I like the look of it to kind of flow together. So make your decisions based on what you want. And again, that was wet, and I'm going to put that there. Wash my brush off, make it just a little damp, and then I'm going to encourage this to flow a little bit more. Cool. Yeah, I like how that's looking on this side. Now, one thing we want to do is that this little extra diamond facet is on a different plane than anything else, so we probably want to combine some colors. I'm thinking maybe lean more into the magenta and the purple type colors, so let's actually fill that in while we're here. I'm going to start with some kind of diluted magenta. I'm going to try to define that diamond shape. I've got too much water there, so I'm going to dry my brush off. And I'm going to suck up some of that and also kind of even out those lines. Again, I'm doing my best to not touch the previous areas I have painted. So I've got my pink there, and now I'm going to grab a little bit of this purple, and I'm going to put it on this side. Ooh, that was a little more than I meant to. It's all right, I can dry my brush off. And I can suck up a little bit of that, but that will kind of show a little bit of that transition from this plane to this plane. All right, let's add a second layer to this one here. And I'm actually going to do a few things. I'm going to add a second layer in a similar way that I did the first layer of this purple, but I'm going to do a few hints of that magenta kind of on these sides. And I might even do a few little hints of the blue on the edges as well. So let's start by just repeating the first thing we did on these, which was to start by concentrating the purple color at the bottom. Every layer we add is going to add a little more pigment. Then I've lightly washed my brush off. And do that a few times so that it is less saturated towards the top and more saturated at the bottom. And while this is still wet, let's take advantage of that. And let's grab a little bit of this magenta and let's put that around here to hint to that being kind of reflected throughout the crystal. If it's not spreading how you want, you can take a little extra water and kind of dab it on there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my darker blue, but I'm going to put it on the side that it's there. Now, can you see how that color kind of popped out there? It's because it was too wet. I needed to be a little bit more patient. But I can fix that a little bit by just kind of taking my damp brush and just lightly tapping and trying to encourage it to behave a little bit more in the way I want it to. Cool, yeah, I like that. Let's do that same thing for here. So again with the purple, right along the base parts, concentrate that color. Gently wash your brush off, tap it slightly dry, and soften that edge and do the same thing again. So it's a little more diluted towards the top. I'm going to pick up a little bit of that extra water. Hello, hello. I think I need to grab a little bit more of this magenta over here so I have it on hand. And again, I'm going to kind of reflect that on this side so that it looks like that part is kind of reflecting the other part that it's connecting to. And I dropped that into the wet shape I had there. Loose bristle, there we go. And then I want to do the same thing on this side with the blue. So the paint palette I'm using has a combination of Shinhan and Core watercolors in it. This is a like a travel set that I added my own tube paint colors too. And even though my lines in between aren't super great, you can see how that kind of brings a little bit of light into this. And now we need to darken this color even more. That blue. Let's just go ahead and grab quite a bit of that blue. Really concentrate that, especially at the base, even especially on the outer edge over here. Before, again, washing our brush, slightly tapping it off to dry a little bit so that we can kind of encourage this to become a nice little gradient. If you have too much water, you can always dry your brush off and use it to suck up a little bit of that. And the way that crystals reflect light is sometimes really surprising, so maybe let's actually pop in a little bit of that magenta again to kind of show that the light is shining through it. And let's do it right along here while that's still wet. Oops, I picked up some scrap paper there. And there, that's kind of the base crystal one. I like that quite a bit. I'm going to let this kind of sit and dry and just see how I feel about it, because I might want to make some adjustments to it. I might want it to be darker. I might want it to have some background or something, but I'm just going to let it kind of chill out for a little bit. And let's actually start working on this. So let's choose a similar light source where it's going to be coming down to hit this right here as our primary one. And let's actually start by, let's make this one almost entirely white because we're going to do some heavy outlines. So I'm going to take a brush that I've just washed and I'm going to put, oops, it's not just washed. I'm going to just put some water down on this one, on this segment here of what I drew there. I'm going to suck up a little bit of that. So that it is starting to soak in, and let's get it to reflect the light so you can see. Do I have a light source that's going to show you this? There we go. So I am using Canson XL 140 pound paper now, and then these are just Taklon round bristles. And I'm waiting for this to soak in a little bit, because I'm actually going to preserve more of the white space on this and lean more into this bright yellow. I'm just going to kind of drop it in there and just let it do what it wants to do. I'm not going to mess with that one at all anymore. But on the same kind of face of this, or same facet, I'm going to put that yellow a little bit more heavily. And this one I drew so dark, it is not going to matter if I touch or don't touch, because I'm going to have to add lines to this. And let's actually see what happens so that you can see what happens when I drop in a little bit of that purple. It's going to mute part of this, but it should repel some of this as well. I want to hint to the fact that there are a bunch of crystals around the base of this, and so it kind of goes into some shadow. And it gets a little bit muted there. Not the prettiest, but it does kind of happen where it kind of just fades off. And let's actually make this facet more focused on that magenta color, because I'm really liking that magenta. I'm going to grab some of that magenta, and I'm going to put this down here. And here, and then I'm going to transition this over to the yellow. Here it's going to kind of naturally bleed together. This would also be pretty light, but let's just give it a little color there. And then let's pop in some super dark blue on this edge to hint to, yes, there is something here. Oops, I accidentally touched it there. Well, we're going to lean into it. I feel like the light reflecting would be similar over here as it is to here, so let's put some of that magenta color there as well. And I'm not preserving my lines very well, so I'm just going to go ahead and let those all kind of touch together, and maybe they can start to kind of flow a little bit together if they're still wet. And then we're going to choose, this one is going to be our bright one again. So I'm going to wash my brush off. I tapped it just a little bit so that I wouldn't put too much water here. And I'm going to put this as my primary bright side. And we can actually do the same for this one. I'm going to imagine that this facet is probably also going to be the one that's going to be reflecting the most light. So I'm just putting water on, and that top part, I just want it to really shine, so I'm just going to drop in just a teeny bit of that yellow on those. On the same facet side, the one that's going straight down is going to reflect a little bit less, but it's still going to be really bright, so I'm just going to concentrate that more. On on that yellow. And I think that this one would also be pretty in the light. So let's actually put a whole bunch of that yellow there. It really flowed into that one. I don't want as much in that one, so I'm going to wash and dry my brush off and just lift out some of the pigment from that one. And then I actually like how these kind of flowed together, so I'm going to try to, before this one fully dries, I'm going to try to kind of encourage some of those things to happen there. This one has a slightly different facet structure, but we're going to go with the pink again here. And hope that this is kind of wet enough that it's going to flow a little bit together. And then I'm actually going to put this one with the blue here because I imagine that this crystal is actually casting shadow on this one here. Oh, but first let's add in our pink on some of these other facets here. I'm going to put it on this one and this one here. Before moving on to my blue color, which I'm going to put over here. And right here. I'm imagining that's casting shadow. And then I think it would be here too. Ooh, those were much more wet than I remembered. It's alright, we can always dry our brush off and lift out bits of that if we want to soften it. And then one thing you can do at the base if you're trying to do kind of a crystalline structure is it gets a little bit, the waters get a little muddy at the base of these as to what's actually happening. So one thing that we can do is we can just take some of those colors a little diluted. Just take some of that blue, I put some more water on my brush, and I'm just going to kind of tap around. And then let's do the same thing for that yellow with I wash my brush off. Kind of just tap around in a few areas. And let's let those dry for a second because I'm starting to get a little bleeding there. We want to just kind of chill out for a second. And I want to present another option while we're waiting for these to kind of chill out and then evaluate what we're doing over here. Is the other one we can do is just have a ton of fun. So we can just make a background with some of the similar colors we've been doing. And then we can identify areas that maybe we could actually draw the crystals over the top of that will create a really kind of pretty drawing where we can take advantage of what happened in the layers before. So let's actually do a background one. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wet my brush, and I'm going to use a slightly bigger brush for this one. And I'm just going to, I'm not even going to get the whole thing wet. I'm just going to kind of willy-nilly put some marks down. You can see that part of this is wet. I'm going to start by carving out just some of the yellow, and I want that yellow to touch in some of the areas that I pre-wet the paper and some of the areas where it's going to go on that dry paper. It'll be darker on the areas that it's dry in general. And then let's take some of this quinacridone. Get a little bit more there. Oops, can't see that. Sorry about that. And I'm going to drop those in some of those adjoining areas. And then I'm going to do the same thing with that purple. And then let's maybe hint to some blue over here. I'm purposely not letting the green and yellow touch so that we don't get kind of a greeny type color. And then if you want to, you can kind of feather out some of the edges with just some fresh water. Just have a little bit of fun with this. this. Let's actually do this one on over here too. Start by just putting some water on. Doesn't have to be all the way across, because this will allow there to be different amounts of saturation. I'm going to start with my yellow here. Then I'm going to go into this magenta here. Before adding in some purple colors. And then some blue over here. So we're just going to use these backgrounds to draw our crystals on. And we can go back and forth in these if we want to. More than likely there would not be kind of these white spots in these crystals. There might be. We could maybe even define one of those as a facet actually. So that could actually possibly work. But I'm going to kind of soften a few of those just with a damp brush, just to make them go away. And then on this one over here, I need to kind of feather out some of those edges. I just want this to be really soft. I'll leave it like that, except for I'm going to actually plop in a little bit extra color. So I'm going to take some straight pigment from this permanent yellow deep, and while this is still a little bit damp, I'm going to drop that in there. Then I'm going to do the same thing with this magenta. I'm going to grab some of that. I'm going to dilute it just a little bit. Oh yeah, that's pretty. Alright, so before we can actually draw on those, we want to let those set aside. I'm just going to kind of let mine sit, and then I can revisit them to see if I like what I have or not. And let's go back over to these. The first thing I want to do is I want to, because I'm just kind of creating some chaos at the bottom, I suppose, in order to kind of show that there's a bunch of other parts to this segment. I'm going to do that by taking some of this diluted magenta here. I'm starting to run out of it. I'm going to have to make some more of it. And I'm just going to kind of touch along the base here. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then let's go back to looking at this. Now, I like what I have here, but I think I can build a little bit more depth. I think I'm going to leave this side here, the yellow side, as it is, because it's a pretty yellow color, but if we were to turn this black and white, these two have very kind of similar feelings of value. And so I think that even though this color looks darker than this color, I don't think there's as much depth as could be on this. So I want to do another layer of this one and this one, but not on this one, and even maybe on that little facet there. So sometimes it's good to just let your paintings sit so you can kind of see what you want to do with them, and they're going to change a little bit as they dry. But I'm going to do kind of the similar thing I did before, although I need to mix up some more of this purple, so let's go ahead and do that. I did that by taking some of this blue and then some quinacridone, magenta, and maybe a little bit more blue. Ooh, that was too much. We're going to have to go back over to that quinacridone. This might be a little bit too dark. Much darker than what I initially had, so let's add a little bit more water here to dilute. And I think I want to make that a little bit more warm color with a little bit more of that magenta. There we go. And then I'm going to put that right here along the base. Again, I'm trying to concentrate that color here and here, and then I'm going to wash my brush off, and with a damp brush, I'm doing this with my bigger brush, we'll see how well I do with this. I'm going to bring that up. Like that, and do the same thing up here with my damp brush, trying to create kind of a little gradient. So you can already tell the value has changed a decent amount here. I'm going to darken this even a little bit more with a little bit of that blue along the sides that's going to touch over to that blue. And yeah, I can definitely tell more dimensionality here. And I'm going to add another layer on this side too with the blue. Just taking this blue, and I might not even really at this point try to turn this into more of a gradient because we've got a bunch of layers here, and so there should be some dimensionality kind of built in, and I really want to bump up the pigment on this one. So I will just put that down on that side, and then there. Now it's really popping out there. Okay, all right, back to the comments. Okay, there's a comment that Nicki Minaj died. Oh my goodness. Well, hopefully that's a rumor. I'll have to look that up later. That would be sad. And then there's a comment about, can you please do water next week, river, lakes, or oceans? Yes, I can do some water aspects. I am not great at water either, but we can work on it together. We can go back to kind of the beachy ones. All right, let's take a look at this. I don't know how I'm feeling about this totally, but it's almost dry enough to where I can add some pencil, and so let's actually lean into some kind of pen and ink stuff here. You can see the difference in how much more light looks like it's being reflected when you do preserve those white spaces, and it's so hard to do, especially with straight lines, but it can really help. Alright, so I'm going to take my Papermate pen. This is not actually a waterproof pen, but it's my favorite pen. Oh, thank you. Did you fact check? I was thinking that hopefully is just a bit of a hoax or something. Alright, so I'm going to actually outline, and then we're going to do a little cross-hatching on here too. So I'm just going to define on all these areas where it's dry, where all of those lines would be. So where I kind of made those pencil marks. And that's going to kind of do the opposite of what we just did, where we preserved the white space and just emphasize those areas. And then one thing that we can do at the base of these is do a little cross-hatching in order to kind of create shadowing, to kind of give the effect of it being in shadow. Do a little cross hatching on that one and here too, to make those a little bit darker. Sometimes that can really help. Good. Thank you, fact checkers. I'm just gonna kind of make some marks down here to kind of show the base of those. And I mean, this one there's a lot of things that we could do to improve this. We could add some fun backgrounds. Sometimes if you've got one that you don't entirely love, it's a really good time to just play with it. I mean, maybe we could do some fun outlining of this. This could totally ruin this, just for the record, but maybe it's a good time to play with some concepts you've been thinking about. Actually, that looks kind of cool. That looks kind of cool adding that. Let's add a couple more layers of that. And then one other thing we can do today, if you guys are interested, we've got a little bit of extra time. We could do a little geode painting. They're kind of fun too. They're even easier to do, but they're a great exercise for preserving white space and then charging, which is where in a wet area you add additional color. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Kind of like that. Let's get back over here to these ones where sometimes you can just use backgrounds to build in. I'm going to start with a pencil just to kind of save myself. I'm going to start this one. Let's find one of these to work off of. I'm trying to find an interesting one. I have a whole bunch of rocks around and I couldn't find all of my different crystals. So the one I'm using is just a Papermate black felt tip pen. It's not one that's made for watercolor or anything, but I love writing with this pen. I think it's got a beautiful feel to it and it's really dark and you can do so much with it. This is the one that I take notes with and then I also use in art. Alright, let's choose a general crystal structure from this. I already did that one. Maybe. Shoot. One of these has to have an interesting crystal in it. Oh, this one. I like this one. Alright, so I'm going to choose the main part where I put maybe the light's coming from down over here. And maybe the one facet is here. So you can just follow along with the shapes I'm doing because I know it'll be hard to see this. But this crystal, the main face of it, it actually goes up, down, and then this side is a little bit more regular. And then there's actually a little triangle here. And then over here, again, we're just making triangles. It's just, instead of turtles all the way down, it's triangles all the way down. And let's make this one move in this way. And now I'm just making my parallel lines. Here. Let's make it a little bit longer. And then again, these lines are parallel to kind of form create that illusion of them being, it being more three-dimensional. And so you can also just do a fun background and then do some pen work on top of it. And let's go ahead and just put that on here. And this will be another good one for some cross hatching. The main thing if you want to really get better at drawing crystals is just look up a whole bunch of examples. My best tip is to either get some little clusters or just do some Googling to find them. And then the first thing I always start with is I choose one interesting facet on it, and that's where I start my whole crystal from. Can you erase that? Are you talking about the pen or the pencil on top of here? When it's on, so there's pencil here. Let's see. You can't really erase too much. I mean, you can kind of lift. Yeah, you can erase some of that, but it is going to take up a little bit of the color as well from underneath it. And then to create more of that depth, we want to actually pick where this is going to be kind of in shadow, and maybe here. Maybe here. I don't know. This one's not turning out quite like I wanted it to, but that's all right. And since this is not a waterproof pen, I can't actually go in and fill some of these in. If you were using a waterproof or a water-safe pen, you could actually go in and kind of re-emphasize some of those areas. I probably should have done that before I added the pen. Let's do that over here. Okay, so we're going to do another crystal here. Let's choose it here. Let's make this face more of that kind of one that we did before, where it's kind of that elongated diamond shape. And let's put our little diamonds here on the sides. Let's bring this one here. And then let's bring this down. Let's bring this actually out of frame. So now that I've actually drawn more of a crystal, I could come in here, and since I'm just using a pencil. Yeah, exactly. You can use watercolor pencils to do outlines. I actually have a video on that. I don't do it as often as I should, but it's because I just don't use them that often. I'm going to try to emphasize some of these different areas, kind of lean into what's happening in the background here. So I'm going to fill this in here. And let's fill it in over here too. Let's lean into what's happening with the pinks as well. Ooh, that had kind of an interesting effect. I'm going to wash my brush off and just kind of try to let this all flow a little bit. And then let's brighten some of those yellows too. Just leaning into what the background kind of is giving me. And for this, I might not actually try to prevent this flowing or completely. Ooh, that actually I think looks really pretty. I think once I outline this, that one will look really neat. So I'll wait to do some outlining on this one. We have a few minutes. Is anybody interested in learning how to do the geode part? Let me know in the comments. If not, we'll just wait for some of those to dry, maybe add some more details. Yes, okay, cool. All right, I gotta tape this one down. I'll just tape it to the base of this, the bottom of this. All right, again, we gotta be prepared for this loud noise. Now for this one, you can kind of pick a single color. I usually like to pick a single color. Think of like agate, especially agate slices or these different geodes where the really interesting part that happens, there is a crystalline structure inside here, but the interesting layers in them are usually all kind of a similar color family. There's some variation in the color, but I recommend picking kind of one color and then mixing up 3 versions of it. So for this one, since I have quite a bit of this purple, I will do a purple one, but I'll make one that is a little bit more pink and a little bit more blue, or I might make one that's a little more muted. And then we'll also want a gray, because most of these have kind of this, well, they've also kind of painted this and added some there, but there's kind of a concrete-esque element to the interior part of most crystals, or most geodes, or the exterior, sorry. So it's always nice to kind of rim it in that darker gray color. So let's tape this down. Okay. While we're setting up for this, and I will tell you the colors I'm going to use to mix up my colors, but if you guys have requests for different things that you want to see from me, please let me know so that I can kind of, I'm trying to compile some lists of some videos that have been requested and things like that, because I want to make sure that there are the resources that you guys need when I'm able to answer the questions. I won't be able to answer all of them, but sometimes I can also refer you to somebody who can answer questions better than me. Alright, so I'm going to take my test strip here, and I'm just going to kind of make a mark here so I know what my base purple is going to be, and that's like, this is, if I were to think of an amethyst purple, that's so perfect. Peonies, okay. Peonies were one of the first things that I experimented with painting watercolor in, and I'm not sure why, because they are very difficult, but yeah, we can definitely do some of that. Yeah, so we will start to kind of, I will keep adding in classes, but we will occasionally circle back to older classes as well, because I know there are new people, or sometimes you can't attend, and so yeah, it'll be kind of a good way to circle back to some of those. So great suggestions. Gouache paint. Ooh, we're going to have to find a gouache expert for that. I've only painted with gouache a few times. A succulent class. Yeah, we could definitely do some cacti or succulents and things like that. So I'm going to take this blue here, is kind of a phthalo blue, and I'm going to just grab some of this violet color that I have in my palette. And I'm going to just mix it in. I just want this one to be a little bit more blue. Yes, that's a nice variation in color, but maybe a little tiny bit more blue. And yes, these classes all get posted. I do have a YouTube channel. Oh, I went too far with the blue. I have a YouTube channel, which is Rebel Unicorn Crafts. I have a few actual videos there where I post like an actual tutorial, but I do post weekly these after. It usually takes me about a day to get around to posting them. Okay, so we've got this purple, and we're going to do kind of a blue purple. And then let's do kind of a pink purple. Start with a bunch of that magenta here. And let's grab some of that blue. Ooh, too much blue. Maybe not. Let's see what happens. That one's way too similar, so I need to make that more pink. I'm going to grab that magenta. So yeah, if you ever miss a class, it will be posted within a couple days, and you can follow along. Yeah, let's go with that kind of bright pink. So here are my 3 colors. We've got this color, And that one is a combination of the magenta and a little bit of phthalo blue. We've got more of a blue, but it has a slight tint to the purple. And then we have our primary color here, which is this kind of amethyst type purple color. This is another one where you don't need a bunch of, you don't have to draw anything, so that's kind of nice. I always like to hint mine in the corner, so I might kind of make mine loop here. And we're just going to work in we're not working in layers because we're not going to be layering color on top of color, but we're going to be working in layers of the agate. And we're going to make sure that we don't touch in between the layers to kind of give that buffer of there's usually kind of a translucent or a white color in agate type geodes. All right, so first I want to use mainly this base color. So I'm going to get my brush pretty wet because I want this to be diluted, but I don't want to completely dilute this color. And I'm going to take my wet brush and just grab a little bit of that purple color. And then we're going to just make kind of a mark that's kind of a little arch. And while that is still, we want to vary the pressure so that it's a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller in some areas. And while this is still wet, we want to dry our brush off and grab some more of those pigments. And we actually want to, right along the edges, drop in some of those colors. And just let that do its thing. Yeah, exactly. We've moved on to doing a geode. And some layers you can concentrate more on the blues, some layers you can concentrate more on the purples, some can be darker, some can be lighter. So let's actually make a darker one by actually filling our brush with that nice purple color. For this next one, and we're going to bring this close to the other one. We're just going to make another layer. And again, you want to kind of vary how thick or thin that line is going to be. And while it's wet, we can take maybe some of that darker blue and touch along the edges, one edge of this. You could even take some water, wash your brush off, and you could even drop some of that in here while it's still wet, and that will actually affect how this dries and how that color shows up to give some interesting effects. Maybe at this point we need to actually drop in some of this pink so that we can have it throughout. Remember, nature is natural, and so it has a lot of kind of unique flowing pieces to it. The more irregularity you can get in this, the more fun this will look. And you kind of want to wait for one of these to be how you want it to be before you move on to the next one. So I think I actually want a little bit more of that blue concentrated because this is all a game of making sure that you're doing this while it's still wet enough to take that color. Okay, there's that one. I'm going to wash my brush, and this one, the base I'm going to use is kind of that blue-purple color. And let's make this one a thin one here. We want to vary between the layers. Every once in a while there's just a nice thin layer. And let's just leave that one as it is. Before maybe we've got another bright layer. So let's actually start with this with some water in it, some of that pinky purple one. Maybe it's a little bit thicker at the base. And we don't want those lines to touch, But I want to concentrate a bunch of color along the edge while that's still wet. Sometimes it's fun to play right along the edge where you've got wet paper, but you also have dry paper on the other side. And if you can get that balance right, you'll get a really interesting kind of bleeding effect there. Again, if you've got too much and you want to vary this, you can wash your brush off. And while this is nice and damp, if you actually kind of drop in some fresh water along one edge, it'll push the pigment to the sides of it, and this can create some really interesting effects. I usually like to drop it in, wait for a second, dry my brush off, and then I suck up a little bit of that so it's not going to run all over the place. So you can get some of those kind of neat blooms happening there when you add that water in. Let's do one more kind of thicker layer with this purple here. This is kind of more of a violet amethyst purple. It's a little bit watered down. There. And let's add some fun colors. I'm actually going to go straight into my pigment of this violet color here. And I'm going to try to really concentrate this along the edges while that is still wet. Oops, I went a little bit too far in one direction. But it's okay, we got to remember, nature is natural. Really just trying to really concentrate some of this color. And now without washing my brush off completely, I'm just going to dip it in the water so that the pigment that's already in my brush from this can actually move around a little bit more. I'm just going to kind of dot this in a few areas. I'm drying my brush off, and now I'm going to suck up a little bit of that pigment. Maybe transfer it over here. See, this is drying a little bit too much over there. Okay, I'm going to run to my closet really quick and get some salt, because that can be a fun way to add the interior crystal part. Oh, here it is. So this is just some coarse sea salt that I have, and I keep some of this in my studio because, and if you've been doing watercolor a while, you've probably seen this trick, but you can actually add salt to your paintings, and the pigment will really kind of suck to the edges of the salt, and it can create kind of an interesting texture. And I think I like to do that on the interior of my geodes because it creates kind of that like look of all these little tiny crystals, and since salt is a crystal, it's kind of a match made in heaven. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wet kind of this interior part here. Again, I'm going to try not to touch that other one. I'm going to wet the whole thing. Then I'm going to, on that new wet area, I'm going to sprinkle some of this salt pretty heavy. If you do this, you have to wait till the next day to remove the salt, but you can just brush it off. And then I'm going to just drop in some of that pigment around these salt crystals. And it will start to bunch around the crystals, the salt. And it can look really neat. Let's add another color, couple colors too. And when that dries, it'll kind of give a little bit of a texture to it, which I think it looks kind of neat. The last thing we want to do on this is add our gray layer, and this is the only layer that I usually actually touch along it. So I want to make sure this is pretty dry so that we still have a nice separation between the bright color and the gray color. So let's actually mix up our gray color while we wait for that to dry a little bit more to be able to add that. So I'm going to, you can always use a Payne's gray or a black color to make your gray, but I usually like to try to kind of mix my own gray so that it's in a similar color. I'm going to take my violet, and then using a yellow type color, maybe let's actually take some of this yellow ochre, maybe some of the color I already have here. This should create kind of a bit of a brown that we can turn into a little bit of a gray by adding some blue. Ooh, way too much blue. That's not going to turn brown now, or not going to turn gray. Maybe I saved it. There we go. Got a nice gray color using some of the other colors I used throughout this, so it's going to kind of match nicer to the actual painting. And this layer is usually a little bit thinner, so I'm going to start, because I want to preserve some of that real more pigmented stuff. I'm going to start by actually adding some water to my brush, and this is clean enough to where I can use this. And I'm just making a more diluted form of this gray here. And then I'm going to actually put this layer here and pretty much let it touch the purple layer before. I'm varying the width of this a little bit. We don't want this to be a perfect line around. Hello, hello. And then I want to concentrate some of that color around the edges. You could take some Payne's gray at this point to even further kind of concentrate colors at the edges. But there we go. Now we've got a geode. All right, I'm going to add, I just want to see what this is going to look like if I add some pen to this. So let's go ahead and add these outlines here. And so this is the one that we painted the background first. And then I just kind of concentrated some of the colors. These ones are okay. They were kind of fun experiments, but, you know, they're all right. And on the other side, I think this is dry enough for me to flip over. are the crystals that we painted. And then this one I kind of had a little more fun with some more graphic style to it. So there are so many different options you can do, but that pretty much sums up today's class, or wraps up today's class. I really appreciate you guys spending some time with me, and if you feel like sharing in video form on TikTok or sending me a picture through Instagram, either at Lacey Walker Art or at Rebel Unicorn Crafts, I always appreciate it. It really does brighten my day. I will just have to say that the other day I was having a really, really stressful day, and I got a really nice message from one of you from TikTok on Etsy, and it turned my whole day around. So when you guys do connect with me and share what you're working on, it really, truly does bring me joy. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you in advance for those of you who choose to share. I really appreciate it. You don't have to share. I understand sometimes it's hard to reach out. But if you do, just know that I'll love it regardless of how it turned out. So thank you, and I hope that you have a really lovely day.